Hello, Facebookers. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Again to my summer series of healing interviews. Yay! Thank you for being with us with the time change. Tonight I have the honor and the privilege of being with Minister Sharon Jameson. And we are going to be delving into a very deep and hopefully meaningful and insightful conversation about spirituality, not necessarily religion, but spirituality, and your chosen life path and your understanding of spirit, God, the universe, that ultimate source, whatever title you choose to call it. So, Sharon, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I'm so happy to be with you tonight. And I'm just going to open the floor and give you the opportunity to share a little bit about yourself and who you are and what you offer.
Sure. First, I'm so grateful to be with you today. Thanks so much, as always. As I said before we got started, I have admired you from afar. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be in this space with you. So thank you so much for that. I am a minister, an author, a corporate leader, a mom, a speaker, and I coach people and help people be who God has called them to be, and not what society has taught or tamed or tricked them to be. And I do that through coaching programs. I do that through speaking. I do that through writing books to help people soar, because you can only soar when you are walking in your authenticity.
Yes.
And when you start to be who God has created you to be, that's when you have success. And so I help people to do that by shedding all of these shoulds and all of these cultural mandates that shrink our happiness and shrink our power. And I believe that when people are being who God has called them to be, that's when they soar, and they soar higher than they have ever soared before. So that's my life's work. That's my mission. That's my ministry. That's my message. And I'm grateful to God to do this work.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I wanted to just start a little bit and talk about, because this will be kind of like a segue into talking about spirituality. But let's just start, from the basics in terms of how did you first hear the call to ministry for yourself, and what was that like for you?
Sure.
How long ago did that happen?
I have to say, I knew on some level that I was going to be a minister maybe 4 or 5 years old. I didn't know how I knew, but I know, because I basically come to the world knowing stuff about us that being socialized makes us forget.
Yeah.
Right? So I knew I came to the world because I had this desire to preach and teach. You didn't have to encourage me. I would get a microphone. I would preach to my dolls. I would preach to my shoes, right? So I always felt that I was teaching. And sometimes I would say something that I didn't even comprehend intellectually. So I always kind of knew. I didn't have the voice of it. But I'm grateful because my father was a minister. So I had people around me confirming my gifts and affirming my gifts, which is a blessing, because sometimes we are gifted, but nobody affirms it. And so we walk around the world trying to say, do I fit here? Do I fit here? What is this? So my father helped me understand this is what this is. But how it needs to look is based on how God is going to orchestrate your life and order your steps. So I knew very early. As I grew up, I always had a heart for social justice. I always had a heart for fairness, and knowing that the culture that we lived in that told me that I was less than was a lie. I don't know how I knew, but I knew it was a lie. I also knew that patriarchy was wrong. So every time, even though I saw all the pulpits full with ministers, I knew that the men were not only the leaders. I knew it. So as a result, I always had this understanding of God but my understanding of God was never consistent with the rules that the teacher taught, that the pastor taught. So the pastor said one thing, but my spirit said another. So there was always this contradiction trying to understand, God, what are you saying to me? And so I was always like a rebel. So I knew I got the call, but I didn't know what the call was going to look like. And so I'm still working that out, because my call continues to evolve as I evolve. And I'm just always leading up the spirit.
Yes, that is so important that you say that, because one of the things that I think is interesting about any type of spiritual path, whether it be you're a fundamentalist Christian or Muslim or Sikh, is that we're ever evolving and growing in our spiritual path. Hopefully, that's the purpose of us being here on the planet. And you said something that's really that I resonate with deeply, because when I was a small child, I had a very strong connection to the realm of spirit, because I'm a psychic intuitive medium. And so I knew fairly early on, I'd say probably about 6-7 years old, when I used to go to church, that the dogmatic, packed preaching that I heard coming from the pulpit did not resonate with me on the heart. I didn't know how I knew that, because I was just a little girl, But something in me, especially as I grew older and I became a teenager, et cetera, I really knew that particular path did not resonate with me, because it felt loaded with a lot of judgment and a lot of dogma. And so I started seeking fairly early on for, as you said, God, what are you saying to me? What does it, in particular, what resonates for me on the heart level? And I think that's so important,
Yeah, I think it's so critical, because to have a relationship with God based on your understanding is a deep relationship. Because the church teaches us, our religion teaches us rules, right? But not a relationship. And so one of the process that I had to go through to get to God, all these bridges I had to cross to get to God. First, I had to decolonize my thinking about God, because the settlers told me that I was second class and I was a slave, right? So remember, we had to colonize that, so we can say, what does God say outside of your thinking that I am less than you? That's one thing.
Yes.
The second thing I had to do was I don't know if that's the word, racialize God, because when I was growing up, we'll make up some words, right? When growing up, that God was always shown as a white male. And I knew that I could not love a God that was white when society taught me that white people did not love me. So I could not love a white God if I understood that white people didn't love me. You see what I'm saying? So I had to detach the racial part of God from God. I also had to depathologize God, because we were taught, God is angry. You a sin. You go on to hell. Shame. And so I had to say, whoa! I had to pull that away, because I didn't want to be fearful of God. I wanted to be faithful to God. It's hard to be faithful out of fear. I wanted to be faithful out of love.
Yes.
I wanted to be obedient, not out of intimidation, but out of inspiration. So I had to depathologize God, and then I had to degenderize God. I don't know if that's a word either. I had to take the gender because we learn.
We're coining some new terms.
The words, right? Or the word might exist, and I just don't know it. Let me say that.
Right.
But we were taught that God was a male. That was never felt right for me. It took me a while to go to the church that I go to now with my pastor. We don't call God he. We call God God. Because God defies gender. God is she and he, right? So now we just call God God. And so I had to change my language. Even words like kingdom. I said kingdom, K-I-N, kingdom, not kingdom. You start changing the language. Then you start having to reconstruct what you believe about God. So I had to tease all of that out. I had to take all the principles in the practices, in the dogma, and the denominationalism, in the rules, and say, God, let me see you. And then God, help me see what you had in mind when you created me. Not what people, not what society saw. What did you have in mind, God, when you created me? And that was a journey, and it was a hard journey. And I lost people. For example, my father's a Christian minister. My first marriage was to a Muslim man. And I lost my family. But see, I was struggling because I knew that God was bigger than one faith. God is so God. God is too big for one faith tradition. If so, God would be God. And so I lost my family, and they didn't come to the wedding or anything like that. And so, you know, after my son was born, who was 26, you know, we had to kind of find our way back to each other because there was a breach. But liberation will always cost you something.
Now listen. That's a, what do you call it? A tweetable moment.
Yeah. So my liberation cost me my family. But I'd rather be a slave to God than a slave to people.
And you know, it's interesting because in talking about spirituality, I know that, you know, there are as many varied spiritual paths as there are human beings, right? And so, and it's meant to be diverse like that. And so my understanding of God is not as some being that sits off in the sky that's separate from me. My understanding of God is that we are the manifest form of that in human form, because I see it as, for lack of a better way to describe it, ever-present energy. We are that. And so my spiritual leanings have always been Eastern based. I don't claim to be a particular Eastern religion, whether that's Buddhism, Hinduism, whatever, but I feel a deep sense that every single, not just humans, but every single animal, planet is that. You know, when we say that God is omnipotent and that, you know, he's in everything, that's what that means to me. That we are the manifest creation of that source. It's just that we're here in human form. So I know that that's a very different understanding of God than traditional religion has, right? So for me, it's like the spiritual path is about coming to understand, because everybody's different, but coming to understand your version of that omnipotent power, and then growing in that, deepening in that understanding. You know, as you grow and as you evolve, so does your understanding of that power evolve as well.
Well, we hope so, because some people grow up, but some people grow old but not grow up. Right? And some people grow old but don't grow wise. So I know those things are not the same, right? Yeah. I love how you articulated your faith, because I too believe that. I believe in the power of the preposition when it comes to God. That God is through me, God is for me, God is as me.
Yes.
Because of God. So when you understand that God works through you, for you, and as you, that's a power of the preposition. So I'm really clear that I'm not set apart from God.
Yes.
God is not this person in the sky. God is everywhere. God is in me. And if you can tap into that power, that is the only source of unlimited power that you have. Everything else will run out, but not spiritual power.
Yes.
That's why we have to nurture it, because and discipline that. We have to learn how to connect with God, how we connect with God. Some people journal, some people meditate, some people pray, some people move, some people breathe, some people yoga, some people walk into nature. We all have our own way to feel the power of God. And God created us. God knows what special modality to get our attention.
Yes.
So God's going to work very differently with you than God works with me, because God made us different.
That's right. That's it. That's it.
Wonderful. So that's why I always say, God, help me see what you had in mind and help me hear you. And that is why, even in this pandemic, I think the sacred pause is calling us to be quiet so we can hear God. Because I think that we've been missing God. Not that we wanted to miss God, but we've been busy. And it's only in that stillness that you can hear the whisper. One of my chapters in my new book is one of the chapters is called "If You Want a Wow, You Have to Listen to the Whisper." The wow, the word of the world. Wow. And so I think that we have to listen to the whisper.
Yes, for sure. So in working with clients, and because I know that you do a lot of coaching and helping them to discover who they are authentically and to live in integrity and to live their truth. Walk me through, say, an initial consultation or meeting with you. What is it that you're wanting to assess in clients who say they're seeking out your service?
Good. Let me just say this. There's really not one way, because there are many ways to approach people as they are people. Right?
That's right.
So I have some type of format, but I always work in the flow, right? Because that's how the spirit works. So when the spirit is flowing, I'm trying to flow too. So I do a couple of things. One of the things I try to understand is how well a person knows themselves. Because just because you're with yourself every day does not mean you know yourself. It does not mean that you know how you tick, how you think. You don't know what excites you, what ignites you, what delights you, what fights you. You don't know all those types of things. And so my first understanding is to see how well you know yourself. Because if you don't know yourself, we have to start there, right? And sometimes it's hard to know yourself because we've been programmed and dumped on and promoted and switched and socialized and brutalized and traumatized, all that type of stuff. We have to know. That's the first thing. Second thing, I really try to understand where a person needs healing, because our trauma hides the truth from us. And the truth is sometimes that you are worthy, you are loved. God did not leave you. And so sometimes we have to find out that trauma spot so you can hear. Because if you are trying to get well, you have to address your identity. Because some people have marginalized identities. You can't have a big imagination with a small identity. You see yourself too small. So we start the self-discovery, talk about the healing. Then the next question I will ask, and I ask different questions to uncover that. What's your purpose? Our purpose is what brings fulfillment.
Yes.
But we have to understand with our purpose, and there's different ways that I try to work with people to understand how they are wired. Because I believe we are spiritually wired to win. But we're wired to win as us, not as an imitation or a duplication. And so that means that we have to know ourselves so we won't try to be copycats or clones of other people.
That's it.
And that takes courage. That takes courage to say, I know that this is what success looks like for you, but what does it look like for me?
Yes. If
it means that I have to defy conviction, or if it means that I have to go against the grain, do I have the courage to do it?
To do that. Yeah.
Because if you are not courageous enough, if you don't have the internal infrastructure to withstand ridicule and rejection, to withstand resistance and gossip, you will never be who God called you to be.
Wow.
You have to be able to take a a licking and keep on ticking. But it's easier to be courageous when you're clear about who you are and who you're not.
Yes, yes.
I'm clear. This is
Yes.
who Sharon is. You don't like Sharon, that's fine. But if I'm wallowing, you can't win and wallow at the same time.
That's it, exactly.
So if this is who I am, I'm clear. Now I have the courage to move forward, because when clarity brings courage, courage brings commitment. And then commitment breeds creativity and contribution. You cannot even be creative without courage.
Yeah.
Because creative saying, I'm gonna do something that hasn't been done. That's what creative says.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's innovation is, I'm going to do something that has not been done. So if you have no courage, you're always going to follow the crowd, the tyranny of the crowd, instead of your own confidence.
So let me pause right there, because you said something very profound, and that is, well, you said a lot that was really profound, but I want to hone in on one particular point.
Yeah.
And that is, I know for me in my walk, I've had to, at different points in time in my journey, speak up and speak out, right? And when I tell you, that was not an easy decision, but everything in me said, you must say something. And I'll speak very candidly. A lot of people know about my former guru, spiritual teacher, Moody. I was devastated 2 years ago to find out he's not who I thought he was. And I made a video that went viral of speaking out about it, lost just about my entire spiritual community behind it. So I know what you speak of when you talk about courage. And I think that you're spot on about that. When you have a very clear, solid sense of who you are, what your core values are, what matters to you, and what matters most to me is living in integrity first and foremost. Okay. Then it is easy, even if you lose people along the way, which you will. Like you said before, liberation sometimes requires you to lose. And but here's the thing, you gain yourself. I feel like I've gained a deeper sense of knowing who I am and self-appreciation. And I think and that goes to when you're like, maybe you're in the same category with, like, let's say, I'm just going to put something up. Let's say you're a broadcaster and you're in that category as a broadcaster, but perhaps the way the broadcasting field is mapped out doesn't resonate with you. Okay. Same thing for ministry. Same thing for healership. I've met some awesome, phenomenal healers, but that way of working doesn't resonate for me. And so I've had to stand apart a lot, and stand alone a lot. But that's because I recognize how I'm uniquely wired. So so talk a little bit about what you feel it takes to say, you know what, if I have to stand alone, so be it. But this is what I need to do.
Right. There's a scripture that says, I'm not going to say it quoted, but what good does it do? I'm paraphrasing, to gain the whole world and lose your soul.
Your soul, yes.
And so I think sometimes we give away pieces of ourselves. So gradually, that 10 years will go by and we realize that we're drifting as a shell or a fraction of who we are, because it's so gradual. You don't realize when you compromise here, compromise there, erase part of myself here, delete a little bit of myself over there. And then after a while, you are walking around as an emotional skeleton. You have a spiritual anemia, atrophy. Giving yourself away. And it happens so gradually, you don't know it. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
What's really critical is that when you start realizing and hearing the voice, or remembering the voice, because you heard it when you were born, right? We are socialized out of hearing our God that's in us. We're socialized out of that, right? Because they have to take that away from us, because if not, we would not be controllable. Right? Because we come to the world to be purposeful. But society wants us to be predictable. So the only way to make you predictable is to make you doubt what you know to be true about yourself. And then I will do what you want me to do. I become a puppet or a purposeful prophet that God has called me to be. So that's another story. So I can get started on this. I'm sorry. Let me know.
No, go ahead.
So one of the things we have to do is to start being able to discern between our ego and God. That takes time. It takes patience. It takes willingness. Now, sometimes we are willfully ignorant because we know that if we hear, we have to do.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, God, I don't hear you. I don't know. We masquerade like we're confused. We're not confused. We're scared. Right? Because I've done, I don't know what to do. Yes, I do. It just made me feel better to say I'm confused versus I'm scared. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's what you have to do when you start knowing that you're different. I feel that start seeking out support. Because you know when you start changing, you're starting to outgrow the group that you're in.
Yeah.
So and that's when you have to pray. One of the chapters in my new book is called "Let Your Purpose Pick Your People." That's the chapter of one of the chapters, because I believe you have to pray, God, lead me to the people who my purpose needs, not who I need.
Yes.
Who my purpose needs, because remember, if I'm doing my purpose, I will have fulfillment.
Yes.
So I'm always saying, God, lead me to the people that you want me to be around, and help me not be so intimidated that I am tempted to leave. Because when we're growing, remember, we're usually the only one in the room who knows the least.
Yes.
So I say, so you start that process, and then you start growing, because this is what I know. Everywhere God has you to go, God will send support. Because when God gives you vision, God sends provision. Right? Vision, provision. You don't get provision if you ain't going anywhere. You ain't gonna do anything. But if you have vision, you'll get provision. So I always lead. Now, here's the thing. You have to pray, God, give me courage to be alone, but not to be lonely.
Yes.
Very different things. Lonely says, I am without myself. Alone says, God, I'm traveling by myself.
That's it.
And so we have to pray, God, allow me to be alone without being lonely. That means, God, fill in the gaps for me until I reach my next destination. Fill in the gaps. Because it is lonely. Can we be honest? Success is lonely. Being a maverick is lonely. Being a change agent and a champion is lonely. Being a visionary is lonely, because God is letting you see stuff that nobody else sees yet. So I just pray. And sometimes I'm just like, God, I'm scared. So I don't know. But if you believe that God orders your steps,
yes,
you're going to know that you're going to make some good steps and some jacked up steps. But however, if God knows that our jacked up steps will still get us to our divine destination. So I think we have to be willing to hold people, but not so tight. Because when it's time to go, you got to go. Lest you forfeit your call. Sometimes we stay in places too long. And then, because opportunity is not forever. Opportunity has an expiration date.
Yes.
So you can leave when God tells you to leave, understanding that you are alone but not lonely, and do it. Because here's the thing, too, I have learned in my own life. There's nothing lonelier than betraying your soul. Oh, that's lonely.
Yes, it is.
I leave Sharon. When Sharon leaves Sharon,
Yes,
that's lonely.
yes, yes.
So
Yes,
I
you
always tell
can.
myself, I might leave you, but I'm not going to leave me.
Right,
Right?
right,
We have to
right.
understand the difference between alone and lonely.
Yeah.
We know that lonely is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we have to pray, God, be a company keeper
Mm.
as I'm on this journey.
Yes,
Be a
yes.
company keeper. God, bring me comfort through this storm. God, journey with me. Because I don't know where I'm going, but I'm gonna let you order my steps. But I'm still fearful. But I still can be faithful in the midst of being fearful.
Yes, yes, you can. And you can still take risk even with fear present.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes fear will still be present, but you can still risk to do something different. So I want to segue a little bit into, we've been talking a lot about, the understanding of spirit, that spirituality is different for everybody. It's unique.
Yes, yes,
We
yes.
talked a little bit about, you know, uh, what's needed in order to live authentically and to
Mhm.
live in integrity. It requires courage and it requires a willingness to take risk. And sometimes you might have to stand alone in that.
Yes.
You mentioned a couple of times about losing, friends along the way as you started to shift and started to grow. Give
Mhm.
some tidbit advice for someone who may be experiencing that right now, where they're starting to maybe sever ties with former relationships that are no longer in alignment with where they are presently, but more importantly, where spirit is leading them.
Got it. What a great, great question. The advice I can say from my own journey and from working with clients is to know that being alone and uncomfortable is part of the journey.
Yeah,
Some places you have to walk only by yourself.
that's right.
Some places that God has to have you by yourself so that you will listen. Because if not, sometimes when we have worse voices around us, we're listening. Sometimes we got to be out there and depend only on
Right.
God. So that's one thing. Know it's part of the journey. Expect it.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when we are talking about people building businesses, I always tell people expect loneliness, expect being attacked, and expect being gossiped about. So now if you expect it, it will hurt, but you ain't shocked. Right? We get shocked because we're like, I cannot believe. Of course you're going to believe that. Of
Right.
course. Anytime you are being who you are threatening another person's model of the world.
Oh, wow.
And so if I am threatening your understanding or your comprehension of the world, of course you have to attack me because I'm attacking your understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to know that's part of the process. And that's why it's so important. I hear people all the time, they want a platform. But I'm thinking, just know you want the spotlight. Can you handle the heat? Because they go together. I was
Mm-hmm.
telling you before about some of the hits I took
Yeah.
that made me revert. I did an interview about racism and been talking a lot about anti-racism and how the church is complicit in racism. And I'm getting some hits. It scares me. It makes me want to shrink. But then I say, Sharon, who are you working to? Who you answering to? So then I come out, but then I go back, come out, I come back. So it's okay to understand. Sometimes you want to sit down, but
Yes.
here's the thing: are you willing to get back up?
Yeah, that's it. And get back in.
You get
Mm-hmm.
back in the game, right? You can go out and have a timeout. And
Yeah.
also, if you're doing this work, especially anti-racism work or spiritual work, you have to sit down and get a timeout because it's emotionally taxing.
Yes.
Dealing with broken people, and I'm broken too. We all have our own degrees of brokenness.
Mm-hmm.
It's taxing,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you are an empath, and I'm an empath. Sometimes after I give all, I'm exhausted.
Yes.
Here's the choice. You want to be a conduit or not? I want to be a conduit. I want to be a vessel. So I'm like, God, use me. Okay, use me up.
That's it.
So I'd rather be used up than not be used at all.
That's it. That's it exactly. That's it exactly. I've been looking, I'm trying to keep an eye over here because I know that sometimes questions pop up, but I think they only pop up if someone is a member of StreamYard.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Not mistaken. So some of the questions may come up later, and that's quite all right. I will certainly be sure to pass those on to Sharon if you want to send those to my inbox or to her. You can send them directly as well. That I have to come through me. Matter of fact, if I'm not the middleman, that's even better. Middle woman, yes, okay. Pronouns.
Language is everything.
There was something I was about to ask you, and it just went right in and right out. Because it was related to your family, and I know bridging the gap for some people, especially with regards to loss, can be challenging. But sometimes I want to say also, when you're making a decision to live authentically, you have to recognize that those bridges are meant to be. Some people say, don't burn your bridges. Some bridges are meant to be burned, and you do not need to cross back over. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yes. I think it's important for us to be mindful that sometimes a bridge is only one way. To cross over to your next.
Yeah.
Right? Some bridges are not both ways, and that's okay. I want to say and help people understand, as I understand, the loss is still going to hurt. Can we just say that? We just be on record. You might grieve. You might grieve the loss. You might grieve the connection. And grieving does not mean that you're supposed to stay, right? Grieving might mean that you need to acknowledge what that relationship was and cry and shed it and move on.
That's it.
And I think sometimes we think, if I miss you,
that means
I'm supposed to be meant for you. But I can miss you and understand that you were, I hate to say it like this, but you were a transportation to my next destination, right? And guess what? We're going to be the same for someone else. People are going to have to move up.
That's it. Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand that I had to understand, because people have left my life and I've left their life, is to know that you might not know why for years or decades to come. Because remember, we live life going forward, but we understand life looking backward. So if we are living going forward, 5 years from now, I'm like, you had to leave.
Yes.
Or you were meant to leave, or you were not good for me.
That's it.
It was good for me that I was afflicted.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I can know your statues. So we have to always remember that we're not going to understand. Live forward. You will understand going backward. And now you can look back, but just don't stay back.
That's right. That's it. Right? That's
sometimes you have to look back to make sure you got the lesson. Because you can leverage lessons. The last thing you want to do is suffer and then get anything out of it.
That is so true.
That is so critical. So people, I think we have to normalize grief.
Yes.
You deal with hospice. Grief is part of the process. We don't want to go through it. I don't want to go through grief.
Yeah.
But I do know, as a minister, that sometimes only in death do you live. And if I have to die to some friendships so my purpose can live, I'm having a choice. You and me.
That's it. And I tell clients as well, you will be with yourself for the remainder of your life. You cannot escape that. So, yes, for sure, for sure. Well, Sharon, I tell you what, it has been a pleasure to be with you. I keep looking because I'm looking off to the side to make sure I'm not missing any questions that are popping up. Um, but I am going to, um, with your permission, share your information of how people can contact you, reach out to you if you're interested in the different services that Sharon offers. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me.
Oh, I'm so grateful. And really quickly, I want to invite people. I start a new program, a 4-week program on Sunday called Unshackled.
Oh,
Desires,
yeah.
Dreams, and Destinies. And it's all about unraveling some of the constructs, the racism, the sexism, the ageism, the homophobia, all these spiritual constructs that have us living lower than our potential and lower than God created us to be. And we talk about that. We talk about purpose. We talk about how to deal with resistance. And people will go away not just learning how to do it, but with practical tips, but also with verbiage. Because sometimes we don't say no because we don't have language for no. We need to have language. So they will walk around away from that. And then we will talk about how to embody who they really are. And if you don't know who you are, how do you embody the values? Because sometimes it takes you a while to know who you are, but if you don't know who you are, just still have your values. What's your vision? It'll come, but you have to get in position to hear from God. And one of the ways we get in position is when we start being authentic, and then we can hear and answer the leading of the Spirit. So that's really important. And then I wanted to read something we talked about.
I was going to say, don't forget. She's going to share a passage here, and I'll let you describe what it is.
And I wish I should have got my glasses. I just think like, you don't have your glasses on. It's called I Have Learned a Few Things. It's one of my books that I wrote. I have learned a few things. And it's the question was about God. Who is God in our spiritual path? And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says, what do you believe? It says, I have learned that sometimes people are not really sure what they believe, why they believe in God, or what they believe about God. It is not the easiest thing to know, especially since we live in a multi-faith culture that practices faith and sometimes practices the same faith in a variety of ways. But I have learned that getting clear about God and honoring God is complicated. Why? Perhaps it could be that traditions sometimes obscure the truth about God. Or maybe it's because rules and legalism affect how we engage God. Can it be that doctrines and dogma cause us to diminish God? Conceivably, it could be that spiritual teaching may truncate our understanding of God. What if it's our need for forgiveness that causes us to fear or hide from God? Possibly it is our denominations that demonize or dictate how we worship God. Could it be that organizations and governments sometimes attempt to institutionalize God? I wonder if it's because society attempts to silence and suppress God. Something to consider, right? But maybe it's because myopic leaders really don't know or understand the fullness of God. Or perhaps it could be that some religious leaders attempt to control people in the name of God. What if our cultural norms somehow negate the importance of God? Could it be that some religious leaders promote an exclusive God and not the all-inclusive love of God? Is it possible that ruthless religious wars confuse us about the role of God? Or maybe it's that we're so spiritually ignorant that we don't know where to look for God. Can it be that we are so spiritually arrogant that we think we know all there is to know about God? That's definitely something to consider. So when you strip away all of the outside influences, deconstruct your religious paradigms, and neutralize your ingrained religious fears, I know it's a process. What do you really believe? What is your truest, deepest knowing about God? My earliest, truest, and deepest knowing was that despite the ubiquitous images that were displayed in many Black cultures, I knew that God was not a white man with blue eyes and blonde hair. My truest knowing was that despite what society said in the late 1960s, and even in some churches today, women could preach the gospel and lead large religious organizations. My truest knowing was that despite what bigoted leaders preach, I knew that gay people were good people and they were not damned to hell. My truest knowing was that despite what some preachers espoused, I knew that the lies they promoted and presented from the pulpit were not the lives that they lived at home. My truest knowing was that some ministers were religious racketeers who were pimping the gospel for their own self-aggrandizement and cared more about their success than their own salvation. Not sure how I knew, but I had a knowing that I could not explain. So despite what was taught and despite what was really shoved down my young, impressionable throat, some messages did not resonate in my spirit. To me, some of the biased Sunday morning rants were wrong, unjust, unethical, impractical, and some were just unbiblical. Even as a child with no formal theological training, I knew that the God who was promoted and advocated so emphatically from the pulpits was not the God I personally experienced. I knew. No, I cannot explain how I knew, but I knew. And I'm grateful that I knew. And I'm grateful that God planted in me a knowing that God is love. And so what I believe, God is love.
That is beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And that, say again the name of your book, that particular.
It's called I Have Learned a Few Things.
Yes.
This is a book I probably wrote 5 or 6 years ago, and I address topics. Because I've always been a religious maverick, so to speak. And so if people want to get that book, they can go on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or my website to get that book. And
I have the link. I'll share that with the rest of your information. I'll provide that as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for talking about religious journeys. And I would encourage people to know God for yourself, because nobody can buy you a ticket to heaven, and nobody has a hell to put you in.
And on that note, so I'm going to end the broadcast for you Facebookers, but Sharon, please stay on just for a moment. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been another conversation as a part of the summer series of healing that I'm doing. And just tune in. We'll have a couple of more conversations next week before we'll be wrapping up the summer. Thank you for joining us. Namaste.